We've been talking about a lot of programming languages this conference. We've heard Elixir, Crystal, all these kind of things. And I would like to talk to you quickly about Vala. Anyone here heard of Vala? Quick show of hands. Not that many people. Vala is the programming language originally intended to replace C for GTK applications. So it's a programming language produced by the Free Software Foundation that should ease development on their stack for programs working on GTK or on GNOME, which should solve a lot of problems that C has, especially a lot of the ceremony around their base system GObject. I'm not going to talk about the language much. I just give you these numbers. Vala has 2 to 3 active maintainers, has 179 unreviewed patches of differing sizes, and the oldest one is 2,556 days old, more than 7 years. The bug is still present, the patch is there. So the thing there is, there's a lot of potential in that. You have a lot of people that would like to be engaged with Vala. You have people that are doing something, like they're active maintainers, but they're not caring about the people that want to be engaged. So it came down to this email to one of their mailing lists. The 3 people most involved and actually developing the language are barely on ISC and or otherwise reachable, which makes it hard to get an opinion or info from them. No one can find out where Vala is happening from the people that are actually building Vala. And that brought me to the conclusion, a surprising number of FOSS projects are ill-equipped for everything except pushing code to master. The last thing Vala needs is coders. They have coders. But they need contributors that do the other stuff, like making sure that patches are reviewed and all these kind of things. So who am I putting these statements here on stage and telling everyone that their project's bad? I'm Florian. I'm working with the Rust project. I'm going to introduce myself a little later because I tripped on my own slides. There we go. I'm a programming language nerd. My rule of thumb is, if a language starts with RU, it makes a good language. I've been a message board moderator for 15 years, not only in programming, also for music, boards, and everything else. I've been organizing the Eurocamp and JRubyConf EU conferences, and currently organizing the RustFest conferences, which is the European conference for the programming language Rust. So you see, I do Ruby and Rust. I used to be involved in a non-profit called Ruby Berlin in board capacity. I used to be a maintainer of the Padrino framework. I'm still there as an alumni. You sometimes see me on the bug tracker if you have to talk about any of the issues that I worked on. I'm still responsive. And I'm a member of the global community team for Rust. So I care about all things community for the programming language. So I want to talk a little bit about free and open source projects and how to manage them and how to avoid painting yourself into a wall like Vala did here, and talk a little bit about the issues that go beyond producing code. Producing code is already very hard. I don't want to devalue that, but there's a lot of stuff that goes beyond that you need for running an open source project, especially when it grows larger. It's pretty easy if you're just one person. You can basically solve everything yourself. You're your own project manager. You're your own boss, basically. But it gets harder once the project scales. The first thing to understand, which is very important, is that free and open source projects that I talk about are non-businesses. So think Rust and Ruby. Don't think Docker and Elasticsearch. These are projects, these are commercially produced software that is put out in an open source fashion, but it still means if they need any kind of problem solved, they just get out their purse and pay someone to do that and instruct them to do so. For any kind of other project, we don't have that much money. Our main resource is time. So the management of classical open source projects doesn't match the management of these kinds of commercial open source projects at all. So it's this version of open source that I'm talking about. And the main engagement mode in this is also volunteer. Even if the volunteer is employed at some company where they kind of manage to get an hour per week or something to be engaged in your project, from the perspective of the project or from project maintenance, they are volunteers. They're not paid for constantly working on your project. And the other thing that's interesting is asynchronous cooperation is the norm. Usually when you go working, there's some way of syncing your work with someone else. Everyone comes in at 9, or we have meetings at a certain point. But when you're working with volunteers, they've got a day job and a family and everything, it gets hard to get a regular schedule where every one of those would show up just for your fun project. There's an expectation of transparent management that comes from the user base. They want to know where things are going. The code is open source. Maybe your organization should be open too. They want to have an expectation. They want to be informed about any kinds of decisions. Sometimes they want to be involved. Some people don't. There's a huge number of people that just don't want to be involved with you. That's fine. But the expectation is there. And that all comes down to a very complex maintainer-user relationship. It's not like you're buying a piece of software and you can expect the thing to work, and if there's a bug, you can expect it to be fixed and all these kind of things. There's the other side of maintainers that basically say it's for free, so why do you bother? Like, don't complain. That's also not quite cutting it. There's a certain kind of trust involved in that relationship. People may use the stuff you gave them for free in their company and have some of their job attached to it. That can lead to problems if they pick badly, or if you just drop the project and suddenly they're the ones that need to maintain it because they introduced it. So the whole thing, you could give a complete talk about that alone. When talking about the relationship of these projects to businesses, I must say, just as context for this talk, for me, commercial usability of an open source project is a byproduct. So any kind of request that comes to me that says, we would like you to change this because it fits our product better, I have to say, you can hire me freelance, we can do that. So this saves you a lot of aggravation as a maintainer of an open source project by not answering these requests like in the fashion that you would be answering them if you were an actual service provider. You really don't want to have that. So then is the question, why do people engage in free software? And there's a very good study by the Ford Foundation, it's called Bridges and Builders, about all the reasons why people engage. And the three main reasons are, first of all, reputation. It builds a public profile, so you can try to get a better position when you're in the market for a new job. You can point towards something that you did. I'm involved in Rails is something that sounds good when you're applying for a Rails job, for example. It's definitely better than I'm just using it. Another big thing is obligation, and there it gets problematic. There's a non-small set of maintainers that maintain a project because they feel guilty that people adopted it, or they would feel guilty if they dropped it and let everyone hang out, right? But it isn't really, I wouldn't say it's the best motivation, because it kind of means I'm just hanging in there because it's there. I would probably prefer to do something else. And the third one is just labor of love. There's people that just build something and put it out there because they love the subject matter. And they build it and they want to build the best implementation of that. In the Rust community, there's someone who wrote, he wanted to write the best grapper available. It's called ripgrep. And he started writing it when Rust was a completely fresh language. So he wrote the regular expression implementation, the file system handling implementation, all that completely, just because that's something they like. That's the only reason they've been doing it. None of these things involves a strategy for community growth. Why would you want to have that? And the reason is growth can be wanted or accidental. So some people want to build something that gets adoption, so they need strategies on how to build that. Or you're putting something out in the world, and suddenly there's 100 companies using it, and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? So both of these things can happen, and that's why you should be prepared, or at least have some understanding on how good open source projects are run, or if you want to be engaged in one. Like, you can also be part of that growth. Maybe you're not a maintainer, but you want to join a project and be involved. And this subject has a lot of points where you can be involved in very interesting fashions. So it's recommendable to prepare. Let's talk about management first. I'm going to talk about a lot of things that usually are kind of irky in the programming community. Management probably being the most accepted one. The thing is we're talking almost purely about people management. Finding contributors is hard, but you also need to keep them. So having some approach on how to interact with them, or what expectation you have from a contributor, or what expectations they can have from you, clarifying that early on helps a lot and makes it far easier, because otherwise everyone who joins your project has to basically negotiate that with you. But the other interesting thing is, because we're talking about a non-business, getting people onto the project has a neglectable cost. You don't even have to add them to your GitHub repository or something, because they could just post a pull request or something. So the real monetary cost of having more maintainers for an open source project is close to zero. And that's a lot of the magic behind growing such a project so quickly. But they're volunteers, not employees. They can join your project at will, and they can leave your project at will. Be prepared for that. That means it both should be very easy. You shouldn't integrate them too much into all your structures all the time. You also should make sure that they don't need to do much to actually join or be involved. People leaving is absolutely not a problem. I just mentioned that before. Like, a question that I often get about the Ruby community is, oh, Steve Klabnik is gone, he's doing Rust now, is Ruby dying? No, not at all. People leave, new people come. There will be next Steve Klabnik at some time. And on smaller scale projects, that's the same. Usually people are replaceable if you are able to find new people that are interested in the same subject matter. So you should, in general, optimize around time, and that should be the question you always have in the back of your head when thinking about a project in which you are involved in or which you are maintaining. How are people spending the time? And pretty often, projects go haywire because they start wasting people's time. And if you start wasting the time of volunteers, they leave, because it's easy, and no one wants to get aggravated for something that they are voluntarily involved in. So always track individual friction in any kind of things. Track delays. No one wants to wait for the request to be served. There's reasonable delays and there's unreasonable delays. 6 days is a reasonable delay, but for some projects it takes half a year to even bring a contribution in, and they're quite okay with that. People that are actually contributing are not. Erase any kind of ceremony. A lot of people that come from big business software world, lesser if they're coming from a startup world, usually bring the ways they work in their company into their project. planning, boards, ticket assignments, and all these kind of things. They can be very heavy, and they need to be learned by everyone who's joined the project. It's completely unnecessary. They spend time on something they really don't want to spend time on. Also, it makes very short, small contributions very hard. And reduce the feeling that people need permission to do something. Just make sure to clarify that you trust them and that they can do whatever they want. There's a checking process later, we call it code review. If you got an idea and it's not too big and you don't feel like you need to discuss it, just write it. And make getting started as a contributor easy. Approachability trumps everything. All projects that are growing fast are very good at making sure that people that approach the project are served very, very quickly. So 3 questions to basically ask yourself all the time is, how long does any of the following take? Fix a typo in your docs. If that takes more than a day and the maintainer is not on holidays, that's probably too long. Fix a code bug, 2 to 3 days or something is probably a good time. It needs to be tested depending on what the amount of testing you need for your project or the guarantees, the quality guarantees you give that might take a little bit longer. And then at the end, discuss, contribute, and review a new feature. That's important to check that because a lot of new things die in discussion. So if you find out that a lot of new things get discussed and never followed through, you should probably check why people are doing this. And then you're squarely at the point where you should probably not write code, but actually start interviewing, because every discussion that goes nowhere, which is like a discussion that ends at no, is time well spent. A discussion that ends at we still don't know is time wasted, and we're trying to reduce time. And get creative with solutions. So 2 of the solutions that we have in the Rust community is, this is, if you ever contribute to any official Rust project, if you open a PR, there will be someone called Rust High Five. And this is a bot that will tell you, oh, by the way, thanks for contributing. It gives you a lot of text on what will happen. The hack behind it is, we found out that a lot of pull requests are not handled because they're not assigned to anyone. So what the bot does is, once you open a pull request, it assigns it to anyone from the project, and their first job is see if they can review it, or assign it over to someone else who's a better fit. Because the ones that are not assigned are kind of in a state where everyone's like, oh, this would be something for Steve, but why is Steve not doing it? It leads to a lot of chatter on how to assign these things. That makes it clear this pull request is assigned to you, and at least take the 20 seconds to assign it to someone else who's a better fit, if otherwise it's on your table and you can try it. That works really well, and it's really simple. GitHub even introduced it as a feature now. You can activate that. And this is a page for the servo web browser. You might think that a web browser is not the thing that pulls a lot of contributors. And they set up a page that from all their projects just collects everything that has the green tag. It's a little bit bad readable here. This is called easy. And these are all things that anyone without previous knowledge of servo and the programming language could do. And this took around 2 hours on top of the GitHub API, and has led to the problem that once they put up new easy issues, they're gone immediately. So servo is a project where easy issues, they need more easy issues to serve everyone who wants to be involved. And the other hack that we have is we have ad hoc teams. So if 2 people work on a common subject, we form a team and we publish that. So if you go to rustlang.org/teams, you get a lot of teams that are working on infrastructure, on community. We have a separate moderation team and everything. And make that public, make it public on your project. That scales really well with project size. If you've got a 2-person project, you probably shouldn't do that. But once you've got a 10-person project and 2 of your people are running your servers, and the other 8 people are coding, that already makes sense to separate that and give them an email address, because sometimes people want to contact these and sometimes want to contact the other. The important thing is that teams report to themselves, so that doesn't introduce like a feedback loop to the project leadership where these teams have to come up with something and have sign-up from the project leadership. It's just, these are people interested in one subject matter, these are people interested in another subject matter, and the reason we do this is to improve communication between them, not like introducing a hierarchy or something. So the community team in Rust is pretty free to do anything they'd like. There's sometimes things where we want feedback, but that is more like we actively ask instead of we're forced to. Write stuff down. Your project has policies and rules. It's not like it could have them. There's personal taste, there's things how you would like to do things, there's things that you accept, there's things that you don't accept, and any time you have an expectation on that, write it down. Otherwise, these rules become tribal knowledge, which is about the worst thing you can have, because that means experienced contributors know about it because they probably spoke about this with someone at a conference or something. New contributors don't know. And they either might break these rules or just feel bad that they couldn't quite follow them through. So in any case that happens, note them down. It doesn't have to be something like have a contributing.markdown file or something. That doesn't have to be in any way very involved. But that means you should have contribution guidelines. If you have meetings, have meeting schedules, have a code of conduct. I get a bit into that later. If you have any kind of disagreement handling, you should also note that down. That's more for larger projects, although that's at a project of 5 to 10 people already important. And if you have a release process, note that down too. Don't work on that too much. Scale it with your project. That can be extremely simple. Just make them unambiguous. For example, the disagreement handling policy that I usually recommend for the beginning is in any kind of issues and in any kind of complaints about behaviors of project members, refer people to the project lead and don't engage. That's very simple to set up, and it would have prevented a lot of the things that you read on Twitter later, where some project member just took up a complaint, and two days later, the project maintainer returns from holiday and is like, oh my God, I need to kick someone out. A lot of these things could be much more easy if you have this. Finally, less negative points, more positive points. Encourage people. All of the projects I'm working for, I haven't searched for myself. And this is true for almost everyone that I know that is working in higher capacity in any of these projects. Mostly there's been the moment where someone of the team said, hey, this is quite interesting what you're doing there. Would you be interested in working with us a little more? That's what the Padrino project did after I sent in a patch of making the HTTP handling better, because that was something I was doing for my thesis back then. And so they liked the patch. They were actively searching for people, more people involved. And so one patch can be enough to be an official part of the project, or even no patch. Sometimes you want to work on something else. That means you can do outreach. This is really something where you have to see what you have the time for, but anytime you are on a conference anyways or something, this neatly works within like your normal business schedule. If you meet someone that's interested in a project, why not, or in a subject, why not ask them if they want to be involved in the project? 90% of the time they will say no, that's perfect. Outreach is a numbers game. If you ask 100 people, you might have 5. If you don't ask 100 people, you have 0. That's how the game goes. There's a lot of stuff you can do beyond code in any kind of FOSS project. It starts at moderation of the issue tracker or general issue tracker gardening, asking people, like there's a whole set of things that you need to do, like people file issues where you don't quite understand what the issue is and all these kind of things. And having people that specifically want to do that is good. Infrastructure, if your project grows, you might want to have a CI server, depending on your project complexity and all these kind of things. Design, everyone wants a website, and they want them to look nice nowadays. Documentation is, like, there's never enough documentation. General communication and marketing. A lot of these tasks are easily done 5 minutes at a time. They're perfect tasks for people that have a full day job, don't have time to code for your project, but they might have the time to send an email, send a tweet, or something somewhere. Having these people around that are very good at just like basically playing tennis with anything that happens in the world is really good. And it's often ignored that this can be a contribution mode for people that just don't have time to write large patches. And that's, stop thinking about contributors as an homogeneous group. So even when Rust is a programming language, a lot of contributors don't know zero about construction of programming languages. A lot of them don't even do Rust for contributing to the project. And there's a lot of people who just love doing the stuff that I mentioned before. Some of them aren't programmers. That's fine. They can contribute too. They just hate people, working with people that don't appreciate them. And that's a thing I see in a lot of FOSS projects. There's this constant air of, if you're not a programmer, you're not quite on the same level, and you're not contributing as much. It's every time I hear, and that's also happening in the Rust community, that people would prefer the people that are working on community to contribute to the compiler. I'm no compiler engineer. That would mean I would just leave the project. I want to do the community work. So don't devalue other people's contributions to the project. The thing that they do is make sure that the people that want to code and that want to build the technology can do their stuff. And that's also an important contribution. And finally, when we talk about management, we've got to do these two things. Do it yourself and not invent it here are very rampant there. I think it's attached to the thing that FOSS communities have this kind of self-made culture. People bootstrap everything themselves. Start reading on the project, start the code. Most projects are single-person projects at the beginning. Later they grow. And at some point, there was the time when all problems were solved by one person, and they would read up on all the issues all the time. That leads to two problems. They come up with solutions, or they try to come up with solutions for any kind of problems and not pick anyone else's solutions for that. Also, they tend to solve problems by code. So a problem that I constantly have is if I have, say, oh, it would be cool if we had a small page for, I don't know, like just an information page about Rust. People would start writing custom software just for that kind of document. Although you could probably just take Markdown, some CSS, and be done with it. Also, some of these people want to do everything by themselves, and at a certain at a certain size of the project, that doesn't work anymore. So they want to be involved in anything, they want to sign off everything. A lot of the growth part is giving up control, introducing trust. And find simple and standard solutions. One of the simplest solutions was for when we had the problem of we want to be an approachable community was how do we make sure that everyone can approach us? And the solution is the community team has an email, communityteam@rustlang.org, and the policy for that email is if you have any kind of question about Rust, send an email there, we'll bounce you off. And that has been working so well, and that's like the simplest solution you can have. These kind of things are gold because they don't introduce any kind of organizational overhead. No one has to maintain a server or something, or we never need to improve that. It just works. We just need to communicate that it works, that you can do that. Yeah, and delegate things. So, after management comes money, the other thing that's irking everyone. Another statement. So one of the things I always hear is about no one wants to pay money for open source. And I don't necessarily think that's true. First of all, almost every project has a money side, even if it's just someone paying for the domain name or a server somewhere or an email host or something. Someone somewhere has a credit card that pays for your project, even if it's just 20 euros per month. Some, as a policy for the project itself, though, strictly take no money. I think it could be said about the Rails project. There's no organizational form behind the Rails project. There's some people footing some of the bills, but project-wise, they take no money. That's okay, but it should be a conscious decision. So after you made the decision that you take no money, don't go ranting that no one's giving you money and using your software. If not, think about how you can pay your costs. You should try to keep the costs low, but be ready for them to rise. If you, for example, think about building a programming language, be aware that if people want to work on every device you want to have, you might want to have a CI system that runs 20 servers and builds every target that possibly anyone could use. That's a problem we have. So developing Rust is actually expensive. But here's another project, a small riddle. So if anyone knows which project I'm talking about, please shout it in the room. Marquez himself is approaching retirement. He's the only person willing to handle the business and operational tasks associated with the project, including taxes, sourcing client work, and managing donors. The rest of his team prefers to focus on writing and maintaining code. He can't hire someone else into his position when he retires, either because he currently doesn't take an income. So the person who's bringing in the money is the only one not getting any money. I find that quite interesting. Anyone came up with a solution? Which project that is? That's OpenSSL. So this is the base library for everything we do for security. And the person who brings in the cash doesn't get any cash, is going to retirement, and everyone else is, fuck it, I want to code. So there's three problems. Financing free software is really hard. I'm very glad that this person does the job he does. No one wants to do the accounts. If you ever do anything in a foundational work, finding someone who does the accounts is really, really hard. And paying for non-coding people is standard. If you, in comparison, see how a nonprofit works normally, it's about 20% of all funds are going to administration and fundraising, which is reasonable. If you need someone who brings in money, probably give them money for that. This is certainly nothing that a small project could do, but it's an issue that we face. But it's also not like there is no money. Like, we've got sponsors in the back, and I probably think that's not for free. Money goes to those that make offers, conferences. Eurocamp costs 70,000 euros every time we run it, and that's not from ticket sales. So, but we made an offer. Here, you can come here. We've got a bank account you can pay that to. We can make contracts. You can send us money, and suddenly people do. Meetups. Meetups are usually, or a lot of meetups have small-scale funding for their food and their beer and all of these kind of things, and people heavily invest that. Tech sites are often financed by advertising, but still people send money towards these. So it's not like there is no money, but a lot of projects are not set up for taking any. And the problem comes when they're consciously or unconsciously want money, but decide not to take any of the action. Is Patreon a solution for that? Maybe, but it has two issues. It's heavily reliant on the self-marketing skills of the person writing the code. So you need to be a self-marketer and a programmer at the same time, which is not fit for everyone. And it has no accountability. Once the money is gone, you have no guarantee that it's actually going to be used for the software. So ways out is finding a sponsoring company, someone who employs one of the maintainers of the project and allows them to do any kind of work at that time. Apply for personal grants. You can go to the Mozilla Foundation and see if someone gives you money for the thing you do. Or you form an association and a foundation yourself, and you're back to the beginning. You need someone who makes the accounts, and you need someone who actually runs around a couple of companies and tries to get them to pay something every month for your association. It's a reasonable thing to do. It's just you basically have to stop coding. If you really want to achieve the next big hack in FOSS, I would say financing is the thing you should think about. And I think we can learn a lot from other NGO organizations about fundraising. People raise millions for saving birds. We can't even manage to raise 10,000s for LibreSSL. And that's not because everyone's an ass. So, let's come to marketing. Marketing generally has a bad rap because marketing is usually attached to advertisement and a certain air of insincerity. And I can totally understand where that comes from because that's what marketing pretty often in the business world is. I saw Chad Fowler last week, and he said something very nice. Marketing something good is a good act, because if you have something good and you don't tell people about it, you're depriving them of the chance to use it. So here's a little piece of marketing that struck me. Who knows what Vue.js is? Okay, could you please keep your hands up? So I'm going to read a text, and once the rest has grokked what Vue.js is, please raise your hand too. So announcing Vue.js 2.0, big announcement. Today, I'm thrilled to announce the first public preview of Vue.js 2.0, which brings along many exciting improvements and new features. Let's have a peek at what's in store. It's even leaner, even faster. Vue.js has always focused on staying light and fast, but 2.0 pushes it even further. The rendering layer is now, I guess I can stop, no hands are raised. So they managed to get a 2.0 announcement that went on the top of Hacker News and the top of any news page everywhere, and didn't even introduce a short paragraph on what they actually do. I still have no good idea what Vue.js is. I now know that it's a React competitor, but people won't click through to find out what their stuff, what your stuff does. Especially if I'm not in the JavaScript community. I would have read the first paragraph and then I would have known what it is, but yeah, I'm not that interested to find out like your documentation page and read your intro. That's not what I have the time for when I'm just idle clicking in the office. So better, this is what Rust does all the time. This is from our 2-year birthday announcement. Rust is a language for confident, productive systems programming. It aims to make systems programming accessible to a wider audience and to raise the ambitions of dyed-in-the-wool systems hackers. And this is a pretty much copy and paste paragraph that we use all the time in front of every newsletter and everything. It really works. It works. First of all, you should make these kind of announcements because that's what people read. But assume that on anything you put out, there's some newcomers along the readers. And these are people you want to reach. People that are already in your project or using your project, you want to inform them, but you also want to get new people on board and get new people to use it. So always include some context. What is it they're reading about? What is this piece of software? This is not the release notes. This is the announcement blog post, so you can do that. Probably skip it in the release notes. And make it skippable. Make it an obvious paragraph, and people that are experienced will just scroll one paragraph down. They won't complain. Helping a lot for us is having a regular newsletter. You would need to find someone who does that. There's a lot of approaches how you can make that easily. The way the Rust community does it is basically there's a big bucket where everyone throws in everything they've seen, and then there's one editor that just takes an hour every Wednesday or every Thursday, just goes through it and puts it into a very standard newsletter format. Don't invest too much work in that. Again, It should be time conscious. You're not doing advertisement for some big startup company where you have someone assigned to writing newsletters all day. It's completely fine if it's just box standard structure. Maybe try to, like we always include the nicest quote from the community from last week so people have something to love, and it works. And it can be as easy as just have the current issues that people have worked on closed or opened and all these kind of things. We even include, like, this is a new beginner issue that we have, and same thing. And have active social media accounts. Again, with social media accounts, a lot of the problems is that you usually have one maintainer of the social media account, and they're publishing what they want. The way you could also solve that is have any member of the community just mention the account every time they have something nice and turn it into a retweeting account. It shouldn't automatically retweet, so we still have an editor that actually decides on what they retweet and what not. But most of the stuff, most of the Rust-lang Twitter account is actually managed by people mentioning the account and the maintainer at some point waking up and saying, okay, I spent 3 minutes reading to what people posted and putting it into a retweet queue. That can be done very leanly. And finally, encourage people to write about your thing. That may sound simple, and it's often missed. Pretty often, people talk to you about what they did at a conference or at an event. Like, I'm using your piece of software. It's pretty cool, and I'm using it to do something. And that's the moment where you should ask, have you considered writing that down? And then just offer, I could reread it if you want to. And that leads to the project developing a culture where people actually write about the stuff they do, which acts as a little bit of a documentation and also introductions to your project, and it's really, really worthwhile. Well, include participation opportunities everywhere. Every time you can mention that there's, by the way, something that people could do for you, just do it all the time. It feels annoying at the beginning. Once you figure out that probably this crowd doesn't have that many people that have even seen me before, it gets much easier on repeating, by the way, you can contribute to Rust if you want to, and it's pretty easy. Finally, never, ever, ever sell your project by trying to put down others. People really, really find that out. It's pretty dangerous because if you misfire and the thing you say about another project isn't actually true, it lowers your credibility. It's behavior you really don't want to engage in, so don't be like, the other programming language is bad. And the other thing is, far more effectively, is telling people how your thing is good on its own, without context. This is just the best way to do any kind of marketing. So if you ever walk on this stage and have a talk about your project, try to keep it about your project all the time. Or if you want to have a comparison, spend a lot of time with making the comparison fair. Get inspired by others. There's some projects that are doing this really well. The NPM project, the CouchDB project, and all these kinds of things. Just copy their approaches. The stance that we have as the Rust community team is that we're also an open source team. So if you want to copy our approaches, do it. We won't bother. Which finally brings me to the last bad word, it's politics. A lot of times people say, I don't want to have politics. The problem is you can't have no politics, especially if your project grows a little larger. The question is always, who do we serve? If we have 5 companies using the project and we have maybe 2 hours a week to help them with something, and that's not enough to serving them all, deciding on who of them to serve is a political decision. Where do we spend our work? Where do we run our conferences? This is especially now as things get hazy in the US, whether you can actually enter the US or not. Running a main project conference in the US becomes an interesting decision. This all introduces tough questions that need to be answered, and that's politics. It's not a bad thing. You are a public project, so keep stuff noted down. Depriving people of the information where things are going is a political process. Google is showing that quite well with Android. They say Android is open source, but actually the only thing that's open source is the point release they put out every time. They give you no insight in what the future decisions of the Android project will be. And make sure others can catch up on the discussion. So if you take open seriously, most of your discussions should be open. There's always things that should be kept to a back channel, but the default mode for everything should be public. Also, clarify your relationship to other projects. That's been very helpful, especially in the programming language world, which is admittedly rather large. It's good to clarify that we're actually not competitors to many languages, but just another option. Especially with the new resurgence of systems programming languages, our stance, for example, is that we're happy about that and that we're basically trying to grow the whole ecosystem and not trying to get like market share from others. Disagreements will happen, and that means sometimes moderation is necessary. Lucky if you have someone around that experienced in that. And leading fruitful discussions in a project is a superpower you just rarely notice. And I just talked to Javier that I actually envy Rails for the discussion culture. People rarely notice because not a lot of people engage in those discussions. And people that are experienced in discussion and experienced in moderating discussions help a lot there. That's why you should assign people to it. Like you should have, like if there's anything going hot, you should have in your project a person to contact. Because most of the time, if something becomes hot, it's still in the state where someone saying, oh, you know, maybe we should revisit this subject from another angle. Like that's what basically moderation is doing when two people go face to face. It's pretty often because they're talking past each other, especially in programming language communities. A lot of fights happen because people are talking past each other, and having a third person that says, you know what, this is what happens, often diffuses these situations pretty quickly. Moderating discussions vastly improves quality and usefulness, and that means more people engage. Because if a discussion deteriorates into two people just fighting and bickering all the time, 90% of the rest will stop reading at that point and don't follow the discussion. So you basically killed it off, although the discussion was worthwhile. Just moderating also has a bad rap for reasons I don't understand. Moderating is the act of steering a discussion. It's not the act of killing disagreement. That comes from the technical implementation of moderation, which is pretty often that moderation software only allows you to kick someone off the board and not something else. Most of the stuff you do as a moderator is actually write and participate in the discussion and keep the banhammer somewhere else. Which brings me to transgressions, which is something very different from disagreements. The point where someone crosses your boundaries will come, even if you say you have none. For me, that was when someone started insulting someone else at my first conference that I ran for having parents that have a disability. This is something where I really want to kick people out. So, have rules to describe what a transgression is really helpful there. That's what a code of conduct does. It basically sets the boundaries where you say, okay, this is the point where I don't even want to discuss anymore. This is the point where I'm kicking you out. And be very assertive that you have these kind of rules. And if they're broken, act as swiftly as possible to clarify the situation. Still, a lot of these transgressions can be solved with an amicable solution. Pretty often, it's perfectly fine if someone says sorry, the other person says, don't do it again. It's perfect. If you can work towards that, and that's, again, a moderation task, your stuff won't end up on Twitter, and everything's good. Like, making clear that these boundaries are there, but also working towards amicable solutions is very, very important. I've never, ever seen people raise accusations out of spite in practical work. It's often argued in discussions, but I have to say it out loudly, I've never seen it happening. But still, it's life-saving. Feel free to close a debate temporarily. It's your place, it's your issue tracker, it's your bulletin board, and pretty often, because of async mode of working, people aren't there to handle it. So one of the solutions, if someone comes up with a public complaint and people start getting angry, start discussing, is to close it down and say, sorry, team management is currently away on weekends or something. We close that down until Monday, until you get a reply. Thank you for filing this issue. That's perfectly fine. I don't understand why people don't do this more often. It's perfectly okay, and the last thing you want to have is 4chan running haywire on your bug tracker for a weekend. But in most cases, assertive and clarifying words and working towards clarification suffices. Don't feel pushed by the image of this blowing up on Twitter or something too much. Pretty often, most cases, you can solve in a very good way with no one being hurt. But there's still the worst case. In worst case, transgressions kick people out, and that might happen. The Rust team had to throw out a contributor from the Rust compiler that did large contributions for being very, very aggressive towards other people holding different opinions. And there's a point in a project where you just have to be assertive and say, okay, this is not working out anymore, do something else, but don't contribute to Rust in the capacity that you are. But these cases, to reiterate, are rare. There's a signal problem. Good resolution isn't worth noting. Scandals, whatever a scandal might be, goes to Twitter, goes to everywhere, immediately goes haywire. So you can do 100 good handlings, and the 101th will just trash all your work. This is just, no one has found a solution for that. That is how the internet works. If you're engaging in that kind of work, shoulders down. Hope that it doesn't happen too often. But training helps, like train these kind of situations, and that's why I say start with these kind of things early on, like assign moderators to your mailing list, assign moderators to your bulletin board or to your issue tracker, because they will learn on how to diffuse such situations on the easy cases. There's my example for that, which the currently researching open social network space with Mastodon. There was someone who closed down their Mastodon instance, and they wrote something very interesting. So I opened up a server and started monitoring it. I invited any kind of user in with a strict no rules policy. That was until some users started posting illegal and disgusting content. No shit. What were they thinking? That's what no rules especially says. If there's no rules, people from the, some rules might apply to me, will start using that instance. Because the sign you put out in front of your project, that's the thing that people will act upon. And that's what you should carefully think about, what you want to present to people and how your project works. The ultimate goal of this is make sure that all online interactions are constructive, safe, and lead to a goal, which is on any kind of capacity where the project is involved, it should be towards a project goal, otherwise it's off topic. And again, be conscious with people's times. People don't want to spend all the time reading the rants of your most prolific ranter in every thread in your forum. These people are driving people away, sorry. Okay, so final words. These are my last negative words. The tech community has a distaste for people managing the social side. I tried to phrase that in any better way, but in general, community-wide, it's true. It's not like a lot of people are engaging in that behavior, but defending these kind of people is very, very common. It would be, I think, a lot of the problems that I described are coming down to this. The hardship of making sure that people that want to care about the whole social thing stay within the project and just don't flip the table and go away. That leads to support frameworks for open source software currently being very weak. It's very hard to find where you turn to once you got a successful project, to turn to people that are helping you with the things you're not good at. Because that's basically what it is. Finding new contributors is always the chance to also find people that fill the gaps in things that you're not good at. You're not good at moderating a bulletin board. That's fine. If you find someone that is, that's gold. Keep those people. Also, part of it is resolving the same problems over and over again. It's not like all these things are new. But still, a lot of projects solve that because maybe the solution comes from the PHP world, and they don't want to adopt what PHP projects do, or these kind of things. It's incredibly surprising. I don't know why. It can be, though, a notoriously brain-teething thing to work with. I'm very happy to work in these kinds of fields in open source. It is much more fun than coding because that's my day job. And you see a lot of awesome stuff that people are building, and I'm very happy in supporting them in bringing that out. So it's not like I would say that we should change the relationship between tech and the social side. The tech is really awesome, and we should talk about that more and not drive away the people that want to talk about it more and help people out. And finally, help these projects where you can. As I said, there's a lot of contribution opportunities for people that just have 5 minutes a week or 10 minutes a week. Find those. Help a friend out that has a FOSS project. All these kind of things. They will be incredibly thankful, and you're helping a lot. So, I'm at the end. Thank you. I want to mention some of the material on the slides is from a study from the Ford Foundation. I highly recommend reading it. It's a very good view on the current state of things. Sadly, it's very light on the outlook on how we could fix these things. So that's still an open problem, and we're hackers. I think we like open problems. Thank you.
Thank you.